Imagine that there is a father who owns an old and worn-out boat. As he grew older, he decided to pass this boat down to one of his children. The first son took the boat, and instead of getting rid of it, he began to fix it piece by piece. Whenever a part broke, he replaced it with a new one. Over time, he replaced all of the boat's original parts until there was nothing left of the original boat. Meanwhile, the second son came along, gathered all the old parts his brother had removed, and reassembled them to create another boat. This new boat is entirely made of the original parts that their father used to build the first boat. Now the question is, which of the two boats is the real boat of the father? Is it the boat that the first son kept, which gradually evolved over time, or is it the boat that was built by the second son from the original parts? This story illustrates the ship of Theseus paradox, which is a profound philosophical question about what makes something the same over time. Does identity depend on the original materials, or does it rely on continuity, form and function? Remember this, the paradox will be needed later. When the manga stopped at chapter 390 for 4 years, I had a question that kept running through my mind, and I was confused about the answer. Since the succession war will end with only one prince remaining, this means two things. Either the good will prevail, and Princess Wobble will win the throne with the help of Kurapika, or the evil will prevail, and one of the evil princes, like Seridnich, whether Princess Wobble wins or Seridnich wins, it felt to me like a drawing missing something, and I was puzzled about how Togashi would fill that gap. If Princess Wobble won the war, it would feel strange to me, because Togashi is a writer whose endings are unpredictable, and he never follows the conventional path. Hunter x Hunter is my favourite work, because I know that even though the story's protagonist, Kurapika, is on Princess Wobble's side, that doesn't mean anything, and it never guarantees victory. In fact, I would almost say the opposite. As long as Kurapika is on Princess Wobble's side, that means he will suffer, and the princess may lose, and Kurapika may break down mentally. Togashi is known for never choosing the conventional and expected path. At the same time, I had a small problem with this situation. The scene of losing Princess Wobble for Kurapika would almost feel like a repetition of Gon losing Kite in the Chimera Ant arc, and Kurapika would almost enter the same psychological state that Gon went through back then. So at that time, it felt like a challenge to Togashi. How would he choose the winning prince? More importantly, how would he craft the path and scenario that leads to that victory? In short, at that time, I was confused. If Togashi chose Princess Wobble to win, this scenario wouldn't quite represent Togashi's style. But if Prince Seridnich won and Princess Wobble died, it would be like Gon and Kite's scenario, and I considered that to be a repetition. My perspective and analysis at that time may not have been the best, but I might have been right about one thing. Togashi makes it very hard for Princess Wobble to be the winner. Most of the time, when he faces a choice between option A and option B, he creates option C instead. It's similar to the Chimera Ant arc. While it's true that Netero lost, he took down the king, Poof and Yuppie, and eradicated the Chimera Ant threat. When the battle between Netero and Meruem began, we wondered who would win in the end. Victory and defeat were crucial to us. But when the battle ended, we realized that Togashi wasn't focused on who won or lost in that fight. From the very beginning, the outcome of the battle was known. Although Netero lost his life, he ended the threat of the ants and completed his mission perfectly. Meruem, who didn't know his name, the nature of the human race, or the purpose of his existence in this world, found it through this battle. The same thing applies to the succession war and the winning prince. It's true that it's hard to predict which prince will be the last one standing, but rest assured, Togashi will give you an entirely unconventional scenario and avoid anything too simple. This made me come up with a strange idea in my mind. Is it possible that the succession war could end with more than one prince remaining? This idea first popped into my head due to a personal desire. I developed this desire while reading the chapters of the succession war and discussing them. I hoped to see some princes beyond the succession war arc, and that their story wouldn't end there. In this arc, Togashi presented us with several carefully written characters, like Prince Halkenberg. I hoped that these characters wouldn't meet their end in this arc, and that we would see them in future arcs, continuing their journey with us. For me, this was an emotional wish, unrelated to logic, based on emotions and intuition. I felt that keeping these characters for future arcs was like an investment in gold for the future, but this idea no longer seemed just an illogical wish. Several things began to make me doubt that Togashi might actually go for a third ending, and that there might be more than one survivor in the succession war. This doubt began with Princess Kacho. Even after her death, her Nen beast manifested in her likeness and personality, and with something we all know in the laws of Nen beyond death, this idea began to grow stronger in my mind. Let's focus on Princess Kacho. We all know she died and was eliminated from the succession war, but her Nen beast manifested in her form and personality. If I asked you, is this the real Princess Kacho? Even if you answered no, you know deep down that your answer isn't entirely complete. This is like the ship of Theseus paradox. In the example I gave, the first boat is the father's boat. Even though the son changed every piece, the boat still retained its identity. And although it's hard to apply this to Kacho's case, we can agree that she died. And this version, though sharing the same thoughts, mind and personality, body lacks the true identity. But if we apply this to Kite, it's different. Despite being in a different body now, he still retains his identity as Kite. The idea of death and then returning to life in the Succession War, even with the fall of a prince, has truly become possible, especially with the chapters of Prince Hulkenberg and the body switching ability, as well as what we saw earlier in the Chimera Ant arc with Rebirth. If Togashi gives a new identity to the princes, as happened with the Chimera Ants like Colt and Koala, then yes, the Succession War could end with the survival of more than one prince. And this could be one of the ways Princess Wobble survives. Speaking of Koala, there's a story related to him that I want to mention, and it's crucial for understanding this larger topic. The first time I watched Hunter x Hunter, there was an episode I didn't understand anything from, and it always seemed strange to me back then. The story in episode 147, which talks about Koala and how he became a follower of Kite, is rich in layers, but I will focus on the part related to the topic of this video so that it's easier to understand.
Before I was reborn, I had a job, getting rid of people. I'd get my orders, and I'd pull the trigger. What little time I had to myself, I spent yelling at people. It was a job anyone could do. A stupid cycle that continues, even after rebirth. I just wanted to give her an escape from the endless cycle. I'm not exactly sure how it worked, but I thought if I let them take her, torture her, and then finish her off, the cycle would repeat itself. Imagine a dull, simple life in the middle of nowhere, where one lived in peace and quiet, until suddenly assaulted by mindless violence and killed. As I shot her, I prayed she would escape that cycle. But it didn't matter at all what I did. The Queen still ate hundreds of humans. And when they were reborn, only a precious few could remember their prior lives. But I suppose it just might be possible that most of the human souls managed to escape safely. But I wanted to do something. I wanted to feel like I was helping them to escape. But if you're inside that body, then of course she isn't. It must mean that she somehow escaped. And though I keep looking, I have yet to run into an ant who's told me that I killed them before our transition. I wonder, did they all escape? Before all this happened, I didn't believe that souls existed. I didn't think humans were worth any more than flies or fleas. They lived, they died. And that the ego was nothing more than a glitch. A side effect because the human brain was a complex thing. You die, and it's over. Dust to dust, scattered to the wind. I believe those tiny fragments served no purpose whatsoever. And yet here I am repeating this cycle, over and over again. Although I look totally different now, I'm still doing the same stupid things I've always done. It made me think. I may be stupid, but I can't deny the things I know, and I won't ignore what I don't know. I died, and my body was torn up and digested into molecules. But it didn't end there. I always figured being reduced to something that small would be the end, but this stuff possessed a power I could never have imagined. Particles no larger than pollen, almost too small to see, have enough energy to impact our health, and not just now, tens or even hundreds of millions of years later. And our DNA, which is even smaller, contains all of the information that comprises us within an elegant double helix. It seems small things, infinitesimally small things, aren't meaningless. They're needed to build the enormous space known as the universe. Just because something is small doesn't mean it produces any less energy, not by a long shot. The soul is probably pretty small, but it still contains enough energy to reincarnate itself.
Koala says that his previous life was very similar to the one he's living now. His job was simply to shoot whenever he was ordered to do so. He described his life as a ridiculous cycle that continued even after being reborn. Koala didn't believe in something called the soul before he died. He thought that humans were as insignificant as flies and fleas, and that there was only one life and one death. The only difference was that the human mind was more complex than others, and that when a person dies, their body decomposes and turns into infinitesimally small particles that scatter in the air. He thought those tiny particles had no purpose, but after he died and his body turned into those small particles, it didn't mean the end for him. Instead, he was reborn. That's when he realized those tiny particles carried an immense amount of power and energy that he could never have imagined, and that was the reason he was born again. He continues to explain that DNA, which is much smaller than these particles, contains a huge amount of information that forms the basis of living creatures. Koala understood that these particles were essential for the creation of this universe. Simply put, he realized that these tiny particles were the reason for his rebirth, even though his body had been killed, destroyed, and eaten. And those small particles contained so much energy that allowed him to be reborn. These particles might be the concept of the soul, something he didn't believe in before. Here, Togashi tried to explain part of his interpretation of this topic through the character of Koala. He tried to make us understand why in his story there were ants who regained memories of their previous lives, and why there is something called Nen beyond death. And he tried to make us understand why Kite came back to life after his battle with Pitou, and why, in the very first definition of Nen, it was said that Nen is the energy of life. As someone familiar with many sciences, philosophies, and social sciences, Togashi has transferred his beliefs into this story, as he will soon dive into even more difficult to understand matters, as seen with Hisoka, Kacho, and more recently with Prince Hulkenberg. To avoid drifting further into this topic, what matters to us right now is trying to figure out how the succession war will end. As I mentioned, all of this made me think that it's possible for the succession war to end with more than one prince alive. And as I also mentioned, this thought came from a personal desire, as I've never found the kind of ending Togashi might choose to conclude this arc, especially since, at this point, the story is no longer just about the princes. There are other conflicts that are just as important, such as the spiders, and Hisoka, Morena, and the Mafia, and recently, Beyond Netero has his own personal struggle. We once thought he would just be that polite traveller heading to the Dark Continent. We have Hisoka at the beginning, who came back to life after giving an order to his Nen. We have Princess Camilla, whose ability literally revolves around coming back to life. We have Kacho's Nen Beast, which created an identical version of her. We have Hulkenberg and his body switching ability. We even have Misha, who is essentially a zombie. If you notice, Togashi has provided many different examples related to this concept, almost as if he's planning something big in this direction. Even Kuroro's words when he said, "Even if I die, the group I created will still be a source of fear," could also be related to Nen beyond death and our topic here. It feels like Togashi is preparing and explaining things, giving us examples for something significant that's going to happen in the upcoming events. When I planned this video, I wasn't exactly sure how to start or what to write and analyse, so you'll find me in this video jumping from idea to idea in a way that might confuse the viewer, but I think it's enough to know a few points. Firstly, the ending of the succession war will certainly be unexpected, and Togashi as usual will take an unconventional path. I mentioned in the previous video that something must happen to Kurapika in the midst of this arc that affects his mental state, like losing Princess Wobble and breaking the pact between him and Queen Otio. But because Princess Wobble's Nen Beast ability is still unknown, it might be something that brings her back to life in a different way. However, this remains a slim possibility. Nen Beasts draw their abilities from the personalities and identities of their princes, but Wobble is just a baby, so it's difficult to predict her Nen Beast's ability. There's also the idea that Wobble could be Beyond's daughter and part of his grand plan. Although I'm against this idea, it remains a possible and strong scenario. What I'm trying to say with all of this is that the rules set in the succession war might be broken, and even death might not mean the end in the later chapters of the succession succession war. On one hand, Togashi might take the easier route by halting the succession war ceremony altogether. The succession war ceremony is like a nen ability that depends on conditions and rules. In chapter 371, when Kurapika was explaining to the maid Shimano the difference between the prince's nen beasts and the other nen beasts created from nen abilities, like the snakes from the silent majority's ability, he pointed out something important while explaining. He noted that the succession war ceremony, as we mentioned, is like a nen ability, and it has conditions that must be met for it to remain active. If one of those conditions is broken, the ability will be cancelled and the nen beasts will disappear. At that time, Kurapika said that if one person withdraws from the succession war, the condition might be broken and the whole contract would be invalidated, causing the nen beasts to disappear. However, at that time, Kurapika didn't know that the withdrawal of the princes was difficult due to what happened with Kacho. In other words, it would require cancelling another condition, like breaking the jar or obtaining one of the 3 treasures. And since I've mentioned this sentence, you must have thought of Crollo and his goal of stealing the 3 treasures. This means that there might be a simple alliance between the two at some point, as they could share the same goal, even though their reasons differ. Most likely the key to this alliance would be the ability that Kurapika obtained from Longi. At this point, someone might ask an important question. If the succession war ceremony is cancelled, what's the need for those coffins? This is a very important point because it doesn't make sense for Togashi to introduce those coffins if they weren't going to be used, especially after Princess Momozi's death. Although the purpose of the coffins is still unknown, let's assume the most popular theory. The theory is that these coffins take the aura of the princes and the king and transfer it to the winning prince. So we're left with 2 possibilities. The first possibility is that it's not necessary for all the princes to be in those coffins for them to work. Let's say instead of the winning prince receiving 100%, they would only receive 80%. The second possibility is that a prince might survive with nen beyond death, with a new identity that's not accounted for, just like the chimera ants. Or the last possibility is that most of what I've said is nonsense and Togashi will not use it, and there will be only one survivor in this war.